Hi friends, it's Roz Reads. Today we're reading Magic Tree House, number 35, Camp Time in California by Mary Pope Osborne. You can buy this book or get it from your local library and support the author. Prologue. One summer day in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania, a mysterious treehouse appeared in the woods. It was filled with books. A boy named Jack and his sister Annie found the tree house and soon discovered that it was magic. They could go to any time and place in history just by pointing to a picture in one of the books. While they were gone, no time at all passed in Frog Creek. Jack and Annie eventually found out that the tree house belonged to Morgan Le Fay, a magical librarian from the legendary realm of Camelot. Since then, they have traveled on many adventures in the magic treehouse and completed many missions for Morgan. On their last several adventures, Jack and Annie learned great wisdom from heroes of the past. Morgan is now sending them on another quest. On these journeys, they must help different creatures in the wondrous world of nature. Chapter 1, California. One summer evening after dinner, Jack sat in the living room. He was reading a book. "What are you doing?" said Annie, coming down the stairs. "Reading about llamas and the Andes Mountains," Jack said. "Learning good stuff?" asked Annie. "Good and bad," said Jack. "Logging is destroying a lot of the mountain forests." "What does logging mean?" asked Annie. "Cutting down trees for lumber," said Jack. "In some places it's against the law. It can be a disaster for wildlife." An evening breeze gusted into the house. "Could you close the front door, please?" "Sure." Annie crossed to the door. Instead of closing it, she gazed out at the twilight. "Close it, please," said Jack. "Whoa," said Annie. "Whoa, what?" said Jack, looking up. Annie turned to Jack. "The tree house is calling. It said, 'Come to me, come.'" "You're making that up," said Jack. "Sort of. It didn't say words." "I feel it's out there," said Annie. "Really?" said Jack. Annie's feelings about the treehouse were always right. "Let's go check," said Annie. 10 minutes. 14, said Jack, standing up. "It takes 7 minutes to go there and 7 minutes to come back." "Got it," said Annie. She called out, "Mom, Dad, can Jack and I go out for 14 minutes before it's totally dark?" 14 minutes, no more, their dad called back. "Come on," Jack said to Annie. He and Annie pulled on hoodies and slipped out the front door. They ran across their yard. "Wait, wait," said Jack, stopping. "I forgot my backpack." "Leave it," said Annie, pulling him along. "We only have 14 minutes." Jack sighed and kept going. In the last light of day, he and Annie ran up the sidewalk. The first star of the night shone in the sky. A few cars passed them. Dogs barked from their yards. Soon Jack and Annie came to the Frog Creek woods. They hurried between the quiet, familiar trees to the tallest oak. Jack saw the tree house against the dusky sky. "Good work," he said to Annie. Then he grabbed the rope ladder and started up. Annie followed. Jack and Annie climbed inside the tree house and looked around. In the fading light, they saw 2 books on the floor. Beside each book was a pencil. "2 books?" said Jack. Morgan always gave them only 1 book to guide them on their journeys. Jack and Annie each picked up a book. They read a single word on both covers. "Yosemite." "Yosemite?" said Annie. Jack laughed. "No, it's pronounced Yosemite," he said. "Yosemite." "What is that?" asked Annie. "I've heard of it," said Jack. "I'm pretty sure it's some special nature place in California." "California? Wow, I'd love to go back to California," said Annie. "Me too," said Jack. He opened his book. The first page was blank. The second and third pages were blank too. He flipped through all the pages. "What's going on?" he said. "My whole book is blank." "Mine too," said Annie. As she held up her book, a slip of paper fell out. Oh, a note from Morgan! Annie unfolded the note and read aloud. The trees are calling, hurry and go into the forest through sunshine and snow. Call yourselves artists, draw what you see, give help to others, give it for free. Before you go home, speak truth to power, help save the wilderness by Sunday's noon hour. Annie looked at Jack. Sounds fun, she said. Let's go. Wait, read the last lines again, said Jack. Annie read, help save the wilderness by Sunday's noon hour. So what does that mean, said Jack. Save the wilderness? How's that even possible? Annie frowned. Let's ask that question later when we know more, she said. I can't wait to make a book with drawings. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Sort of. I really can't draw, said Jack. I'm not great at drawing either, said Annie, but I still love doing it. Okay, let's go, said Jack. He was eager to see a different part of California. They hadn't been there since the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. I'll point to Yosemite and see if that works. Jack pointed to the word on the cover of his blank book. I wish we could go there, he said. California, here we come, said Annie. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 2, Land of Giants. Yosemite was cool and very dark. Smells good, said Annie. Jack inhaled the woodsy smell of damp earth, green leaves, and tree bark. It's too dark to see anything, but I can tell my clothes magically changed, said Annie. Jack felt his clothes. Mine too, he said. Feels like I'm wearing a heavy jacket, long pants, and he reached down to his feet. Leather boots? I think I'm wearing the same thing, said Annie. And my jacket has huge pockets. They're so big I can put my sketchbook and pencil inside. Great, me too, said Jack. He dropped his book and pencil into one of his jacket pockets. He put Morgan's message in the other. Where are we? Said Annie. Can we see anything? Jack and Annie looked out the window. The branches above the treehouse were dense with dark leaves, but between leaves and branches Jack could see pale gray sky. Is it dawn? Asked Annie. Or dusk? Said Jack. Hard to tell, said Annie. We'll find out soon. Let's go down. Okay, but go slow, said Jack. You too, said Annie. She found the opening in the floor and started to go down the rope ladder. Jack followed. A mild wind blew through the tree limbs. The leaves made swishing, whispery sounds. Hold on, Jack called. You too, Annie called back. In the dark, Jack tightly gripped the sides of the ladder. He moved his hands and feet slowly down and down, step by step, step by step. The breeze grew stronger, then softer. The swishing sounds rose and fell. This ladder's incredibly long, Annie yelled. Yeah, because this tree's incredibly tall, said Jack. Don't be worried, said Annie. I'm not worried, said Jack. Actually, he was worried. No tree in the world could be as tall as this, he thought. The sound of windblown leaves was starting to sound spooky. The high, sweet twitter of a bird came from nearby, then another and another. It was dawn! Yay! Jack whispered. It's getting lighter, said Annie, and we're almost there. Jack looked down. Yes! The ground was only about 20 feet below. Jack and Annie kept climbing down. Finally, they reached the bottom of the tree and stepped off the ladder. Hey, we are dressed alike, said Annie. Yep, said Jack. In the dim, shadowy light, he could see that their clothes had magically changed into canvas jackets, heavy cloth pants, and leather boots with laces. Jack looked up. He could see a bit of pink sky above the tree top. Oh man, he said. This must be the tallest tree in the world. It's like a 20-story building. And check out the trunk. It's beautiful, said Annie. She took off running around the massive reddish-brown trunk. I'll bet 30 kids could stand around this tree, she said when she got back to Jack. More like 50, said Jack, and all the trees look as big as this one. In the cool morning air, every tree seemed as high as a 20-story building. Did we come to a land of giants? Annie asked breathlessly. Or did we shrink? Jack laughed. Just the trees are giants, he said. The squirrels are normal size. See? He pointed to a squirrel scampering over the forest floor. Oh, right, said Annie. She looked around. Is this the wilderness we're supposed to save? I don't think so, said Jack. The gigantic trees looked super healthy and strong. Maybe there's another wilderness nearby, said Annie. That doesn't sound right either, said Jack. Well, we can figure it out later, said Annie. I can't wait to start drawing. She pulled out her pencil and sketchbook. Seriously, I really can't draw, said Jack. Just try, said Annie. I'll sketch that butterfly. She pointed to a delicate white butterfly perched on a leaf. You can draw the squirrel. The little squirrel was now nibbling a tree cone. Nah, too ordinary, said Jack. Do it for practice, said Annie. She crept closer to the white butterfly. Jack opened his book. He set the sharp point of his pencil on a blank page and stared at the squirrel. Suddenly Jack's pencil seemed to take on a life of its own. Before Jack could think, he drew the squirrel's head. He drew its dark eyes and small ears. Whoa, said Jack. Wow, yelled Annie, drawing the butterfly. Our pencils are magic! Yes, cried Jack. He swiftly sketched the squirrel's body. He drew its long rear legs and short front legs and tiny hands holding the tree cone. He shaded the squirrel's fur on its belly, back, and bushy tail. Soon he was done. Jack smiled at the real squirrel. He knew the little creature really well now. It didn't seem ordinary at all. Look, said Annie, holding up her sketch. Perfect butterfly. Perfect squirrel, said Jack, showing his drawing. We're artists, cried Annie. Chapter 3 Grizzly. I can't believe it, Jack said with a laugh. This is so cool. I know. I want to draw everything, said Annie. I'll sketch that little bird. She pointed to a small red bird sitting on a low branch. Then she turned the page in her book and started sketching. What next? Jack eagerly looked around. A large mushroom caught his attention. He lightly held his magic pencil and began sketching. Jack outlined the graceful curves of the mushroom's cap and stem. Then his pencil moved up and down, drawing the hundreds of fan-like folds under the cap. Soon Jack held up his work. Perfect mushroom, he exclaimed. Perfect bird, said Annie. Oh, shh, there's a deer. Not far away, a deer with antlers was eating the leaves of a bush. I'll draw him, Annie whispered and tiptoed through the forest. Jack gazed around at the giant trees. He began outlining a huge trunk. He drew the deep grooves in the rusty red bark. He shaded the furrows. As Jack sketched the tree trunk, a gust of wind made the high branches sway. Jack looked up. Millions of leaves seemed to be waving at him. Jack stared in awe. Hi there, he said to the tree. Then he grinned. Was he really talking to a tree now? He shook his head and looked around for Annie. Where was she? Annie and the deer were gone. Jack stared through the forest. Annie, he called. He walked around one giant trunk, then another, until he saw Annie. She was standing in a ray of misty light slanting between the trees. Hey, said Jack. Annie turned and held her finger to her lips. Jack stepped softly toward her. Annie pointed to a hollow in one of the giant trunks. Whoa, said Jack, stepping back. A huge bear was asleep inside. The bear had shaggy brown fur and long, sharp claws. Sweet, huh? Annie whispered. Not sweet, Jack whispered back. That's a grizzly bear. Oh, okay, but it's fast asleep, whispered Annie. I want to draw it. Are you nuts? Said Jack. Grizzly bears attack humans. Their jaws are so strong they can bite through a bowling ball. No way, said Annie. I read that, Jack exclaimed. The grizzly stirred and opened its eyes. It looked at Jack and Annie. Yikes, said Annie. The grizzly bear huffed and hauled itself out of the hollow of the trunk. Standing on its hind legs, it looked like it was at least 8 feet tall. And I read that if you run into a bear, you should stay calm, Jack whispered. Act friendly. Wave your arms. Annie waved both her arms. Howdy, she said. Oh, brother, thought Jack. The bear stood still and stared at them. How are you doing? Annie asked brightly. The bear went back down on all fours. Its head was lowered, its ears back. Then it roared. Bad sign, said Jack. He clutched Annie's arm. He pulled her farther away from the bear. Should we run? She asked. No. Bears run as fast as horses, said Jack. The bear growled a deep, low growl. Run! Said Jack. He and Annie took off through the green and brown forest. They tore around the enormous tree trunks. They scrambled over chunks of bark, fallen leaves, tree cones, seedlings, plants, logs, and rocks. They ran until they came to a dirt trail. Wait, said Annie, huffing and puffing. She grabbed Jack and stopped him. Is it still coming? They both panted as they looked behind them. There was no sign of the grizzly. Where is it? Said Jack. Maybe it didn't chase us, said Annie. Or maybe it's hiding, said Jack. Listen, I hear something, said Annie. Jack heard heavy thumping against the ground. Come on, he said. No, wait, said Annie. That sounds like horses. A moment later, 4 men on horseback rounded a bend in the forest trail. The horsemen rode in a line toward Jack and Annie. The first rider was an odd-looking cowboy. He wore a cowboy hat and a bandana. His baggy pants were tucked into tall riding boots. He had a thick mustache and wore round glasses. The second rider was tall and thin. He had a scraggly white beard and wore a shabby overcoat and hat. The last 2 men wore blue overalls. Behind them were 2 pack mules without riders. As the group drew close to Jack and Annie, the cowboy held up his hand. The horsemen and mules behind him came to a noisy halt. Greetings, friends, the cowboy shouted. Chapter 4, Bully for You. Friends, if you haven't, please subscribe to my channel, Roz Reads. Thank you so much. Greetings, Annie said. Did a newspaper send you kids to spy on us? The cowboy asked with a grin. What's he talking about? Jack wondered. No, sir, said Annie. My brother and I were running from a bear. A grizzly bear, added Jack. Oh, I'm sorry, but you can't fool us, Sonny, the cowboy said. No grizzlies in Yosemite now. The last one was spotted 8 years ago. Right, John? He looked at the older, bearded man. That's right, sir, said John. His blue eyes twinkled as he smiled at Jack and Annie. You must have seen a black bear. They won't hurt you if you leave them alone. They mostly eat plants, roots, and berries. But it looked just like a grizzly, said Jack. It had shaggy brown fur and really long claws. Sorry, son, said the cowboy. You have to trust my friend. We all call him John of the Mountains. He knows this wild country better than anybody. For 30 years, he's been studying the animals, trees, and rocks of Yosemite. Cool, said Annie. We're studying all that too and drawing pictures of it. Good for you, young lady, said the cowboy. Well, we must be on our way. If you're afraid of bears, take my advice. Walk softly and carry a big stick. The cowboy laughed heartily at his own joke. The other riders laughed too. Wait, would you like to see our drawings? Said Annie. No, Annie, said Jack. He could tell the riders wanted to get going. But Annie pulled out her sketchbook. She held it up to the cowboy. Check it out, she said. The cowboy took the book from Annie. He opened it and looked at her butterfly drawing. You drew this? He said. Yes, sir, said Annie. We're artists. Well, bully for you, said the cowboy. Wait till you see my brother's drawings, said Annie. Show him, Jack. Jack shyly handed his sketchbook to the cowboy. Excellent, the man said, staring at Jack's squirrel drawing. Here, John, take a look. The cowboy handed both books to John of the Mountains. The elderly man looked at the butterfly and squirrel sketches. His face broke into a wide grin. Goodness, you two are serious artists, he said. What are your names? Jack and Annie, said Annie. Well, Jack and Annie, you perfectly captured the rare alpine butterfly and the Douglas squirrel, John said. Did you know that the Douglas squirrel is the spirit of the sequoia trees? When he eats a cone from a big tree, he scatters its seeds. From those tiny seeds, a few trees might sprout. Over hundreds of years, they'll grow into the mighty giants of Yosemite. Wow, said Annie. That shows how everything is connected, doesn't it? John of the Mountains looked startled. Yes, it does, Annie, he said. One little thing in nature, like that squirrel, is hitched to the whole universe. Exactly, said Jack, trying to join the conversation. John shook his head in wonder. You two are remarkable, he said. How did you get here? Who brought you? Our art teacher delivered us, said Jack. Her name is Morgan, said Annie. She dropped us off near the big trees. Hold on, the cowboy growled. Are you saying your teacher just left you alone in the woods? Well, stammered Jack. He looked at Annie. It's okay. We asked her to leave us in the wilderness overnight, said Annie. We told her we wanted to spend time in Yosemite to make our nature books. She thought it would be a great opportunity for us. I don't agree, said the cowboy, scowling. It's quite risky to leave two children in the wild. Sometimes it might be, said Annie, but not for Jack and me. We're actually tougher than we look, and smarter, and braver. John of the Mountains laughed. I believe you, Annie, he said. He turned to the cowboy. Sir, did you not say you wished that nature artists could travel with us? I did, said the cowboy. Well, two excellent young artists have just crossed our path, said John of the Mountains, and they plan to spend the night in Yosemite. I call that a miracle. I still think they're too young, said the cowboy. Sir, I was out in the world working for my family when I was their age, said John. Won't they be safer with us on our journey than wandering the woods alone? Wait, journey? Where are they going? Jack wondered. Cowboy looked at Jack and Annie. Annie stood straighter and held her chin up. All right, you win, John, the cowboy said, chuckling. Would you two young artists like to join us? Yes, we would, said Annie. We would? Thought Jack. He wasn't sure. We will pay you for your work, the cowboy said. Annie whispered Morgan's words to Jack. Give help to others, give it for free. No thank you, sir. We only work for free, said Jack. But can you tell us where we're going? Of course, the cowboy said with a toothy grin. We're going nowhere, son. We're planning to get lost in the wild. Chapter 5 Lost in the Wild. Lost in the wild, thought Jack. All right, Jack and Annie, said John of the Mountains. Our forest rangers will prepare the pack mules for you. Thanks, said Annie. That sounds like fun. Charlie, John called to one of the men in the blue overalls, you and Archie make room on our pack mules for our nature artists. Yes, sir, said Charlie. The gray mules were smaller than the horses. They had long ears, thick heads, and skinny legs. Both had packed saddles with bulky side bundles. The rangers shifted the cargo forward to make room for Jack and Annie. "Climb on, partners," said Charlie. With the rangers' help, Jack and Annie mounted the two mules. They sat on the back of the saddles with the bundles pushed up to the front. They clutched the straps that held everything together. "Be careful, a mule will always try to make a fool of you," said Charlie. Then he walked off. "Not this one," said Annie. "I love your bunny ears," she said to her mule. "I'll call you Petey for Peter Rabbit." Then she turned to Jack. "You could name yours Benny for Benjamin Bunny." "Not going to happen," Jack said dryly. "All set?" the cowboy boomed from the front of the line. "On through the wild. Remember, our aim is to steer clear of all civilization." As Jack's mule plodded at the end of the line, Jack bumped up and down. With no way to guide his mule, he felt out of control. The group left the dirt trail. Soon they were slowly climbing up a rocky path. "Hey, John of the Mountains!" Annie called out to John, who was riding in front of her. "What's the name of the cowboy with the mustache?" John looked over his shoulder. You don't recognize him?" he asked. "Nope," said Annie. John smiled. "His name is Teddy," he said. "Oh, wow," said Annie. "We once had a great friend named Teddy. He was a dog." John laughed. "Good. Think of this Teddy as a friend, too," he said. "But call him Sir." "Sir? Okay, but what does Sir do?" asked Annie. "Many things," said John. "Years ago he was commander of the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War." "Who are the Rough Riders?" Jack called. "You might call them volunteer cowboy soldiers," said John. "Cool," said Annie. "Whoa!" Jack said to his mule. At that moment he was having a rough ride himself. His mule was skittish. It kept veering to the right or the left. Soon Jack and the mule were traveling far behind. Jack was embarrassed that he couldn't keep up with Annie and the others. Suddenly a rabbit dashed across the trail. Jack's mule lurched off the rocky path. Jack let go of the strap. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. Annie turned to look. "Stop, everyone!" she shouted. "Jack fell off his mule!" All the riders came to a halt. Teddy rode back to Jack. While his mule munched on a shrub, Jack stood up and brushed himself off. He felt his face turn red. He wanted to disappear. "Are you all right?" Teddy boomed. "Did he throw you?" "No, sir, it was my fault," said Jack. "I made a mistake, and I lost my balance." "Ah, don't worry about it, son," said Teddy. "The person who never makes a mistake is the one who never tries anything." "Yes, sir," said Jack. "Be positive, Jack," said Teddy. "Talk to yourself. Say, 'I can ride this mule.' If you believe that, you're halfway there." Teddy flashed a grin. "I personally know that you can succeed at this, Jack." The cowboy tipped his hat. Then he rode back to the head of the line. Jack took a deep breath. He wanted to measure up to Teddy's belief in him. "I can do this," he mumbled to himself. "I can totally ride a mule." Jack climbed back onto his mule. He talked in a whisper to himself. "I can ride a mule. I can do this. I can keep up. I can do this." The mule seemed to hear Jack's words. Soon it was keeping a steady pace behind the others. Teddy looked back and waved his hat at Jack. "Good work, Jack," he called. Jack waved and smiled. As he bumped along on his mule, he no longer felt worried. Forgetting himself, he looked eagerly at the passing scenery. Shrubs, birds, wildflowers. He wanted to stop and sketch everything. After a while, Teddy held up his hand and brought the group to a halt. Jack and Annie hopped down from their mules. The others dismounted from their horses. Teddy was not nearly as tall as he seemed on horseback, Jack realized, but the stout, cheerful cowboy still seemed larger than life. Chow time, Teddy bellowed. All right, friends, we will pick up in another video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, Roz Reads. Please share this video with your friends. Please like this video, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you for reading with us. Bye.